Hey there. Okay, welcome back. We are going to go through, if you will take out your training book and turn to Appendix 2, which contains the Life Care Coach Client Contract. Now, this is just a sample contract. We actually use one that's a little bit different here at the Forward Foundation, but this is a fine contract that you can use if you're, let's say, you want to just start your own private practice, or you're starting a service, maybe at a church or a nonprofit or something like that. This is the type of, you want to make sure that your contract at least covers all of this stuff, and there may be some specific things to your organization that you want to incorporate in. You can tweak it however you want, but I wanted to provide an example of what a coach-client contract should look like, some of the things that it should cover. So at the top there, you see your qualifications. Again, you may have other things that you want to put in here, but at the least, you can say that you've taken this course, which is accredited by the Association for Coaching as a professional coaching course. And it mentions the Global Code of Ethics in there. It talks about the fact that you're working towards certification as an accredited coach. Maybe by the time you have gained your accreditation, obviously you're going to want to change that. But it lets the client know who you are, what your qualifications are that you bring to the table. Then it goes down into method and philosophy of care. And again, this is just a sort of a template. These are the things that you're going to learn on the Life Care course. You may have other skills, other courses that you've taken that you incorporate into your coaching practice. That's totally fine. That's one of the great things about coaching, actually, is that whatever your life experience, whatever your technical training has been, you can just take that and incorporate it into what you're going to learn on this course. And that's kind of part of the process of figuring out who your ideal client is, who are the people that you can serve, where you can really add value because you know something about the things that they're struggling with. So, if you've worked in the corporate world for a while, you're going to want to incorporate what you've learned on the job, working in large organizations. You'll know what it's like to have a certain amount of direct reports, or to be, what it's like to report to a boss in the corporate world, what it's like to deal with company politics and things like that. Likewise, just any area of life, whether you've been, a stay-at-home mom, or you have gone through a certain type of struggle, maybe addiction, or you've gone through bereavement, or, anything like that. Whatever it is, you've raised kids, maybe you work with maybe you train dogs, I don't know, whatever it is, you can take that knowledge and incorporate it in to the tools you're going to get in Life Care. And so you can tweak that section however you want, but the idea here is you want to communicate to the client who you are, what you bring to the table, and how you're going to come alongside them and help them with their goals and their struggles and challenges. Next section, goals, risks, and benefits of Life Care. We want to let people know, hey, this isn't necessarily just going to be a walk in the park. There might be some stuff that comes up that's painful and difficult, and just kind of give them a heads up that could happen, and so that it doesn't take them by surprise. Length of care is the next thing. We want to give them an idea of how long they're going to be in coaching. And you may not know that right away when you first start talking to them, but once you figure out, and we'll talk about this in the next video, is kind of a general idea of what the workflow is from first contact to the point where you're making some sort of a coaching plan. And by that time, you should have an idea, usually like 2 to 3 to maybe 2 to 4 sessions in, you'll have an idea of what this client is really working with. Not just the presenting problem, that's easy. People tend to come in for a specific reason, but there's often something underneath that reason that's making it difficult for them to progress, or there are just ancillary issues that come into the picture once you start asking questions. So you really want to make sure that you don't have just a surface level understanding of what they're dealing with. You want to have some some depth of understanding of what they're dealing with, and then you can create a coaching plan. But again, we'll talk about that more in the next video. So length of care, you'll be able to define that better after 2 to 4 session. Session length, we have in here 50 minutes. You can do longer sessions, you can do shorter sessions, but just let them know, here's how long our standard sessions are going to be, so they know what to expect. Cost, they need to know what it's going to cost them. Scheduling and cancellation, strongly suggest having that in there. They need to know how to schedule, how to change an appointment if something comes up, how soon or how late can they cancel an appointment before the scheduled appointment time. Let them know. You don't want to be in a situation where, you don't have a policy on that and people keep canceling on you and you've set aside this time, and that's an easy way to get burnt out on somebody and to start not liking your client after a while. You have to define the boundaries for them so that they know how to stay within them. So do that on the front end. Don't wait until the relationship is strained before you try and introduce that. Otherwise it's going to breach the relationship, and then you got to do some repair and stuff, because if people don't trust you, they don't like you, they don't feel known by you, they're not going to want to work with you. So easy way to avoid all that is just have it in your intake documents. Additional help, we don't want to be the only place that your client has to go to get help. We're not trying to have a monopoly on your client. There may be community resources, church resources, that they can plug into that's gonna help them make progress. And so you want to build a team around your client if that's appropriate. It could be that for a while you are the only person that they have, but if you can connect them to other resources so that when they're struggling between appointments and they need someone to talk to, they have a way to reach out and get the help that they need. Ending the life care relationship, all relationships end at some point, and that can, in and of itself, that can be a kind of a teachable moment, if you will. So, when the relationship is going to end, we want to talk about that and say, okay, we've worked together for a while. Seems like you've accomplished your goals. You're ready to move on, and just give some time to process that, so that there's nothing left unsaid, nothing left undone, and it feels like there's nice closure to the relationship. Record keeping procedures, I suggest that any records you kept are either stored securely electronically, password protected, or they're kept behind 2 locked doors. So that could be locked door to your office. This is my office, and my file cabinet is right here. It's got a lock on it. Actually, it's 3 locked doors because our front door is locked. So that's the standard, is two locked doors if you're going to keep paper records. If you want to store them electronically, again, it just needs to be password protected. And by the way, coaching is not covered under HIPAA. Mental health professionals have to work under the Healthcare Protection Acts. Coaching is unregulated in that regard, and so you don't have to follow HIPAA, but I still recommend being very careful with client records, very careful in how you share sensitive information. You don't want to harm the client, and records left out carelessly can do that. If somebody else comes across them or somehow finds them, there's going to be sensitive information in there, and so you just want to protect your clients in that way. Confidentiality, I talked about this in the last video, but there's certain situations where there are limits to confidentiality. So if I think you may be a danger to yourself or others, I'm on page 201 here. If I have reason to believe that a child, elderly person, or disabled person is being abused or neglected, to discuss your case confidentially with my supervisor, who I meet with once every 2 sessions. That ratio actually for the Association for Coaching is, I believe, 1 to 12. So for every 12 coaching sessions, you need 1 supervision session. Again, if you're contracting with the Ford Foundation, we will provide that supervision for you. If you're on your own, you'll have to find a supervisor, a qualified coaching supervisor who can provide that for you. And but letting them know in the informed consent that you're going to be discussing your case confidentially with your supervisor. You don't need to use names. but you will be discussing the case. That's a good thing to make them aware of. If administrative assistance may be used to process client information and papers, there might be people, office workers or something who have access to client records. That could be a possibility in your situation. We don't do that here at the Ford Foundation, except I, as a supervisor, have access to the coaches that I'm supervising have access to their records. It helps me in the supervision. If you're to initiate a lawsuit against you or the entity that you work for in legal consultation situations, or if a court of law orders a release of information. So those are the limits to confidentiality, and it's important that your client knows that on the front end. It's trust me, way better for them to know that on the front end than to learn it after a reportable event has occurred. Section here on the relationship, you want to this is where you define the parameters of your relationship. So, my role is to provide you with a confidential place to share your goals, thoughts, and feelings, and to lend you my help as a trained life care. Your part in our relationship is to come prepared to work, show up on time as scheduled, and complete any exercises that we do together. Although you will be sharing personal things during the course of life care, it is important to understand that our relationship is professional rather than personal. Therefore, while you are my client, spending time with you socially is inappropriate. Now, if that feels very direct to you, it's meant to be. That's our policy here at the Forward Foundation. If you have a different policy, that's okay. But I just will warn you, you don't want the line between coach and friend to start to get blurred. You're going to start getting invitations to birthday parties and things like that. And, if that's not how you envision the relationship going, it's going to create friction in the relationship, and that's going to affect your coaching. So I would say preserve the coaching relationship while you're working with these clients. Later, if you want to enter into a friendship with them, the ethical code for coaching does allow that. Just make sure that you're not harming them in some way. And again, refer to the code. Physical health, we want to make sure that it's not a physical issue that is causing the problems that your client is struggling with. So again, this goes back to enlisting additional help. If it seems like they're struggling with depression, say, and they have never had their thyroid check, refer them to the doctor, or for medication or something like that. You could refer them to a doctor. Don't try to be the solution to every single issue that they have. There are other experts that you can bring in. You could refer them to a nutritionist, say, if they're struggling with their weight or their eating habits. You could refer them to a personal trainer. There's all kinds of people you could refer to, and I just encourage you to leverage those resources in the community. Out-of-session communication, a little section on that. Sometimes if you get a client who's especially in some kind of a crisis or something, they may be sending you a bunch of emails or even maybe a bunch of texts. And so you need to let them know what's okay, what's not okay, so that, again, you don't wind up breaching the relationship when you start trying to introduce boundaries that you didn't have on the front end. And then you want to make sure that everybody signs it and understands the rules of the road. So this is an example of what an intake document for coaching would look like. Now, if you're not taking this course for accreditation, you're just learning skills, I would think about this. Maybe you're a small group leader, or you work in a recovery program or at a nonprofit, and you're just going to start, you're taking this to learn some skills that you can incorporate into your job. That's fine. That's great. That's wonderful. I want you to do that. But if you just think about your experiences with the people that you've helped, where has there been relational burnout? Where has there been relational friction? And could the introduction of some kind of a process on the front end of your relationship help to prevent those relationships from going sideways on you? Just think through that. That's why we do this as a professional coaching service, is to just protect that relationship and make sure that everybody understands their role, and keeps it neat, keeps it clean, and keeps things protected. Keeps everyone protected, including the client. Okay, so that's great. That's intake forms. We've covered Global Code of Ethics and limits of confidentiality. And now in the next video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the core conditions of a good coaching relationship. So I'll see you in that video.